Welcome to Beyond the Bee, an ongoing dialogue about the past, present, and future of the B Corp movement. Co-hosts Emmy, Allison, and Ryan Honeyman facilitate an open and honest conversation about the B Corp movement, advise companies on how to increase their impact, and provide a deep dive into the new B Corp standards that are shaping our community.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, partner and worker owner at Lyft Economy, and I'm joined by my colleague, Emmy Allison, also from Lyft Economy. Hey, Emmy.
Hey.
And today our guest is Benn Marine. Ben is the Director of Social and Environmental Impact at Campfire Consulting, a certified B Corp and 1% for the Planet member. He hosts the Responsibly Different podcast, highlighting how businesses use their power for good. An out trans man, Ben works to create a safer, more inclusive world for trans people. He also serves on the Maine B Corp Leadership Circle and co-chairs B Lab's Be Proud network, supporting LGBTQ plus folks in the B Corp movement. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with y'all.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on. So maybe we could start with, if you wouldn't mind telling us about your background and how did you first get into the work you're doing today?
It's a great question. It's kind of a long, meandering story, so I'll try to be brief. But I got my professional career started actually as a professional photographer. And so I did that for about a decade, working kind of in that creative space. And then I got super burnt out and crispy and was looking for something a little more meaningful. And found myself I started volunteering for a marriage equality campaign here in Maine, fell in love with the work, and that work ended up taking me all across the country. I worked on marriage equality in Maine, Rhode Island, Oregon, New Jersey, and Indiana, and then went on to do non-discrimination campaigns in Utah and Idaho, and then continued to do like issue-based work for a couple more years until I got super crispy and burnt out of that. And then I was like, okay, I got to hit the pause button on life. What does that look like? And for me, it looked like going back to school because I had never finished my undergrad. So I went back to school to finish my undergrad. I got a BA in political science. And then my brother was starting a media agency and was like, hey, you've run a business before, like, would love your support and input on things. And I was like, oh, sure. And at that time, it wasn't ever my like forever career thing. I was like, oh, I'm going to help out for 6 months and then probably go back to my nonprofit consulting world. And as I started working with my brother, he was like, I really want to figure out how to use business as a force for good. And for me, where I was coming from, this world of policy and moving hearts and minds and having to do that in a measurable way, I was like, okay, love that idea of like using business as a force for good. Also, I had seen it firsthand. I had seen how we leveraged businesses and business leaders on different campaigns and how powerful and important that is. So I got really excited by the concept. But then I was like, how can we hold ourselves accountable? One, because it's one thing to want to do a good thing, right? And actually doing the good thing is different, right? So the question I had for myself was like, okay, how do we actually measure and hold ourselves accountable to that like vision of using business as a force for good? So I started like doing some research and homework, and that's when I learned about the B Corp movement. And this was January of 2019 that I joined what is now Campfire Consulting. And so it was like, yes, okay, B Corp's going to be like the thing. So just got involved with the community and fell in love with the work. And then we certified in 2022 and we're in the middle of our restart right now. And here I am 6 years later, I'm still there. It's great.
Wow. So 2019, and I feel like you had a podcast even back then, 2019, or organizing, right?
Yeah. So actually, yes, prior to joining Campfire, I had a podcast for organizers and for community organizing called Ocean of Organizing. I think I did like 19 episodes. It's still out there if folks are interested in it. But it was the B Corp stuff that is what launched the Responsibly Different podcast. Because I was like, I don't understand. A lot of the concepts were new to me in terms of business metrics as it pertained to impact. And so I was having all these questions. So I was talking to all these B Corps like, well, what does this mean? And how did you navigate that? And I was like, oh, well, shoot, if I have all these questions, I'm sure a lot of other people do too. And so, we'll record these conversations and share them. And that was how the Responsibly Different podcast started. It's evolved over the years, but that's essentially how that came to be.
Awesome. And then we talked a little bit about how you got involved in the B Corp community, but how has your identity shaped your experiences in this space? And maybe even for folks, could you give a little story of, like the evolution of your identity?
Yeah. So Yeah. So evolution of identity that's a big one. So I'm a trans man, and what that means for maybe folks who aren't familiar with that terminology, it means I was assigned female at birth, but I very much identify as a man. And I'm very fortunate that as I am standing here today on this podcast, I have what's called passing privilege, right? So if you saw me on the street, you would not read me as trans, right? Like you would just assume I was a cisgendered man. And just to like, because I know we're all in different parts of our journey, so I just want to like unpack that a little bit for folks, just to maybe make some of that language make a little bit more sense and be a little more accessible. So when we talk about identity, so for me as a trans man, right? Often people just hear the word trans and they're like, I don't know what direction folks are going. Like, what does that mean, right? If you think about that term, so if I say trans man, it means I am a man. A cisgendered man is a man, right? That prefix is just telling the story of how you came to be in that identity, right? And that's why it's important that's why I feel for myself, and everyone's different, and I can only speak for myself. That's why I feel like it's important for me to share my identity as a trans man, because my experience as a man is different from somebody who was assigned male at birth, right? Same reason why a cisgender person might want to share if they're in shared space where gender is going to be talked about, or that identity might be important. It could be really meaningful to share that, oh, I am a cisgendered man or a cisgendered woman, because then it creates the acknowledgement that I recognize there's more than two genders, and that there are different ways of arriving at a different gender or at a gender identity. And all that to say, gender identity can be fluid. It can change. It doesn't have to be fixed. It's not always linear. Often it's not. For me, it was. Yeah. And how I came into this identity, oh my gosh, that's a really long story. But yeah, I mean, I knew like when I was 5 years old, like I was like, I'm a boy. Like and I knew that there was something wrong with that, and that wasn't okay. And that was something I had to like bury deep in whatever. And then growing up, I was deeply homophobic. I thought being gay was the worst thing I could ever be. So when I come out in my early 20s, which I never had a big coming out, I just was like, this is my girlfriend, right? That was not as challenging as when I actually met other trans folks and saw myself and saw that, oh my gosh, I can be my full self in this lifetime. Like that was terrifying realization. It very much felt like when I saw that reflected back in myself, that it was a truth that I could not deny about myself. And so it was never a matter of if I was going to transition, but rather a matter of when and how and what that would look like for me, and and all of that. And that was much harder, because when and not to say, a lot of folks have, for a lot of people, even coming out as gay or lesbian is very, very hard, and people lose friends and family. And that's why outing people is an act of violence, right? Because it can literally put jobs and livelihoods and access to housing and all the things at risk, right? Regardless of the identity attached to it. And when I come out as a trans person, I'm asking a totally different set of things, right? Like when I introduced my girlfriend to my friends and family, that doesn't really impact them, right? Like it's who I'm dating. Like that doesn't I am not asking anything of you, just to like respect this person that I'm dating and to respect myself, right? When I came out as trans, it's a much more challenging conversation, because not only am I asking you to change a habit and a behavior around how you've seen me and the name you've used for me and the pronouns you've used for me, I'm also challenging your understanding of a societal structure that you thought was fixed. And for some people, that's a really hard thing to move through. And so I'm very fortunate that it was a journey for my friends and family, and we worked through it. Often they didn't know what to say or how to move through it. And I knew for myself, because it took me, I'm 40 now. I started my like social transition when I was 29 or 30. And so it took me 30 years to fully accept myself. Speaking only for myself, I didn't feel like I could expect my family to get it overnight. or anybody or friends or any of the things. And so there was definitely an understanding of like, we love you, we don't totally get it, we're going to figure it out. And so I was fortunate to have that, because not everybody gets that luxury, for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like it was powerful and succinct. And so I know that it's asking a lot to sort of like boil down the evolution of your entire identity into like a 3-minute clip. So thank you. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll frame the episode, like the conversation, and then Emmy can jump in with some next questions. So just for folks listening, we had these 3 episodes earlier this year on the wokeness. Is B Corp too woke? And if you haven't heard those, go check them out. We think they're really good and help further some of these conversations that are in the margins of the B Corp community, and then addressing them head on. So how this conversation with Ben evolved is I had actually called Ben on a separate issue just to check in. Ben's a cool guy to just ask random questions. How are they feeling about the B Corp movement, new standards, et cetera? And as I was talking to Ben, Ben's also in the White Men for Racial Justice group that I'm in. I was like, oh my God, like Ben has so much organizing experience, and then also experience, as a trans man in the B Corp community, that it seems silly to not have an episode that also includes his perspective, not speaking on behalf of all trans people or LGBTQ plus people, but just like having at least a voice in this conversation. And so rather than having this episode be exactly the same format, because if folks listen to the previous 3 episodes on the wokeness conversation, it was like sort of asking everyone the same questions. We've kind of evolved a little bit to ask, Ben, some of his experiences in the B Corp world, but also we're going to have some time in the second half of the podcast to kind of sit back and say, how was that series? How did it sit for folks? What have we heard? Just sort of some of the processing around where the B Corp movement is today around some of these issues. And so maybe, I'll kick it to Emmy. Anything to add there, Emmy?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that I really appreciate the folks that have come on the podcast to speak about these issues, especially in this climate. It's just kind of a lot in general, both emotionally and mentally. And then, it has to do with our livelihoods. But I also just wanted to say that while we have attempted to cover like a wide range of perspectives on these topics, like we could never be done talking about these issues. Like we could continue talking about this it could be its own podcast easily. And so I really appreciate people's sort of patience and also open-mindedness as they listen to these episodes, as they participate in these conversations, because as we will always continue to say, like, this is a journey. We are never done learning, and we will all continue to learn and hopefully do so together and be supportive to one another in that process.
Yeah. And I think one other thing I'll add, and then Emmy, you could jump in, is one other component to this is I'll speak for myself. And then I feel like a lot of folks in the B Corp community have come a long ways on racial equity and, identifying race as like a key issue to understand in racism. And at the same time, trans issues, LGBTQ plus issues, I feel like are not as well known or understood in the B Corp community. So this is also our attempt to sort of let's surface these and have conversations to help educate and potentially inspire folks around, making change. So, Emmy, maybe I'll kick it to you. Where do you want to take episode next?
Sure. Yeah, Ben, could you speak to a little bit how you have seen B Lab and the B Corp movement evolve their approach to inclusion and equity? Are there certain sort of like elements or milestones that stand out to you? And I guess could you take us through sort of your observations in this?
Yeah, I will say I feel like I'm a little bit of a baby bee, right? Because I've only been in the movement for 5 years or since 2020, whatever. And
for what it's worth, I do think that's very valuable. I do think that there has even been still in the last, since you're joining the movement in 2019, there has been quite a bit of change in how we even speak about these issues, let alone like applying these concepts. So we appreciate the perspective for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say, what I can speak to has just been my experience within the community. I will say one of the things people ask, like, what do you love about the B Corp community? And remember too, that this is within a business context, right? So this is when I think about having to go to a business networking thing, if I get to choose between any industry networking thing and then a B Corp thing, I'm going to the B Corp thing, right? Because I at least know when I walk into that room, for the most part, maybe not always, and generally speaking, I feel safe and I feel like there's at least a level of values alignment in that room, right? I also recognize that we're all at different points in our learning journey on various topics or challenges facing society and our environment. And so I think that's also really important to always hold. And I have had mostly a very positive experience. I think I've been impressed with, I'm trying to remember, I've been to 2 champions retreats now, and I appreciate the gender neutral bathrooms. It's like, in my opinion, not a hard thing to do. For some folks, it can be a challenging thing. So I, appreciate those sorts of things. And I do think that there is a lot of room for us to do more in support and really think more intersectionally about how we move through the work, right? I can say as co-chair of Be Proud, like, it has been great. Be Lab US and Canada was very like, yay, we love the idea that y'all want to start more formally because Be Proud's not like new. It actually predates me, but as a network, they were very supportive of getting that started. So, very appreciative of that for sure. And I think often when I think about how as a movement we talk about social change, we do tend to divorce issues as if they're separate lanes. And I feel like that's a bit of a miss, right? Like, absolutely is important to name racial justice. It is critically important to do racial justice work. And it is equally important to name the challenges that are being faced by folks with disabilities, by the LGBTQ community, right? Not saying that one is more important than the other. And there are queer, disabled folks of color, and they're going to have a very different experience than an able-bodied cisgender person of color, right? And the way that these things intersect is important. And just because we solve one issue doesn't mean that we're solving issues for everybody, right? And so I do think that I would love to see more of a shift towards that intersectionality. I think it's important to name these challenges, and I think we can go further and do more. I think we're complex people that can hold a lot of complex things.
Yes, I agree. And yeah, I have been seeing sort of like we are approaching these issues very separately, and there is a real opportunity for them to overlap. I'm curious, in your work with Campfire, with the Be Proud Network and beyond, have you seen meaningful change versus performative change in the B Corp movement?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's so hard because it's hard to a certain extent, we might never know the impact that some of these conversations have, right? So it's hard to say. Sometimes it's very obvious if something's performative, right? Like somebody says something and then you actually see them do something that directly contradicts the thing they said. And you're like, oh, that was performative, 100%, right? And I think about how, it seems like such a simple thing, and you would be amazed how hard it is to get people just to like share their pronouns, right? And so for some people are like, they might feel like, oh, this is so silly. Like, why do we do this? Like, obviously I know what your pronouns are by looking at you. And I would push back on that and say, I don't actually think you do know somebody's pronouns without asking them or them offering them, right? I think by offering our pronouns, we're acknowledging that we don't all hold the gender identity that would be assumed of us. And not everybody's comfortable sharing their pronouns for a myriad of reasons, right? So for some, it's a knowledge point. It's not an understanding why we're talking about them. For some, it's a personal identity challenge, right? It's like, oh, I don't actually know if I feel like I want to use the pronouns that would be assumed of me. And I don't know if I feel safe exploring that in a different way. And so, now I'm in this like really tough situation where like everyone's expecting me to share my pronouns and I don't actually know what I want to share. But I guess I'm just going to share the ones people would assume of me because that's what feels right, because that's what the room's expecting. Right. And then you've built this tension. So there are a lot of reasons why somebody might not want to share their pronouns, and a lot of great reasons for people who are comfortable sharing their pronouns to share them. And so I can see where in a situation where everyone is seemingly using the pronouns that are assumed of them, and that is static for that group of people, it might feel performative, right? And I would even push back on that thought a little bit and say that just because somebody uses the pronouns that are assumed of them today, that might be different tomorrow, next week, 6 months from now, right? And so by making that just a quick, easy habit, we create that space for them to share. Actually, you know what? I'm trying out some different pronouns, y'all. Like, bear with me. So in terms of the performative piece, it's hard because I think the more that we can bring up the conversation, I think it creates opportunities for conversation and for learning and for growth. And I think that that's valuable and important. And I think that's also how we can start to build safer communities and spaces. Because if we're too afraid to talk about it, if we're too afraid to try, what are we doing?
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And as a cisgendered woman who doesn't necessarily like always identify with being a woman and all the things that come with it, I really see pronouns as an act of solidarity. And I also, appreciate making space for folks who haven't fully figured it out and who are still thinking about these things and working them out. But I also just feel like it's really important to say that if you are comfortable, that sharing your pronouns are very much it should be simpler, but like active solidarity.
Yeah. And I would say all, especially with like pronouns or any, like as we're on our learning, like, and we're all at different places in our learning journeys, like we're all going to make mistakes. I make mistakes, even as a trans person, like I get it wrong sometimes. But that's part of the learning and growing, right? It's like leaning in, being willing to make the mistake, apologizing, you learn, you do better next time, right? And creating that space and opportunity for us to be in evolution together.
Ben, I think the pronouns are good because we have talked about it on other episodes. And I guess, I think me and you had even spoken about this like a month or so ago on a call where it was sort of looking at like where are we at politically, especially in the US. And, this idea of someone who may agree with us on some core issue like, hey, economic justice for, working class folks. I'm thinking of like, forgive my like left coaster, like sort of perspective, but it's like, I'm a poor working class white guy, right? And I don't like what Trump is doing and I don't like certain things that I'm seeing. But if someone says I have to use pronouns, or I just don't understand it, and it creates distance from maybe that like solidarity building, and you're an organizer, so this is an even better question for you. It's like, how do we say like, look, it makes you uncomfortable, but this is like so important that like I might lose people because it's like I'm going to make the stand on like we use pronouns in like sort of how we work with folks. Or it's like, it's not quite so black and white, which I think is probably your answer, but it's like we have to be like in certain spaces, yes, but in others, it's like, no, let's like meet them on their core issue and like build that. Like, how do we use pronouns, especially in like a way that like builds connection and like understanding and is not like, leading to people feeling like, oh, I'm doing it wrong or I'm different or something. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And you're right. I'm going to say it's not black and white. The way that I navigate and maybe, if this is helpful for folks, awesome. As a facilitator, the way I would approach it, if I'm, at the front of the room and we're doing introductions and I'm teeing up introductions, I might say, I'm Ben, I use he, him, his for pronouns. And the reason why I'm sharing my pronouns is because I don't want to make assumptions about other folks or how they want to be referred to as. If you feel comfortable sharing your pronouns, please, we encourage you to do so. Also, don't feel like you have to if you're uncomfortable or unfamiliar with what that looks like. So it creates a space for if somebody's like having that inner, I don't know, because I can tell you for me, like a huge moment in my experience was when I went to my very first volunteer action on marriage equality in 2012 in Maine. The very first thing they do is they go into a training and they do pronouns. And I was like, wait, what? I was like, you mean people use pronouns that aren't assumed of them? Like, it blew my mind. And I was in that very situation where I was like, well, I guess I use she, her, hers, ? Like, I don't know. But in the moment, I'm like, yes, I use she, her, hers, right? Like, that's like, right. And it would be, a year or two later until I was comfortable. And even then I was not, it took me a lot of time to accept and move through trying. I used they, them, theirs for a period of time. And then I eventually, started at one point, I had a roommate that was using he, him at work using she, her at work and then using he, him at home. And so I think if we can create that space where I'm going to share my pronouns, this is why I'm sharing them. If you feel comfortable, encourage you to do the same, but also totally cool if you don't. That can be a good in between. And then for folks who maybe are like, yeah, but Ben, I'm not a facilitator. I'm not running trainings. Like, how should I show up in these spaces? I would say just as you feel comfortable, share your pronouns, even if it's not prompted, like even if no one else in the room does it, an example just for myself, I took a wilderness first responder training a few years back up in rural Maine. And yeah, I was like pretty sure I'm the only queer person in this room. And I was like really anxious about like sharing my pronouns. And of course, I did not have to do that when we did a room of intros, but I always have this like, oh, I feel like I should, because like, I should like model good behavior, whatever. Right. And so I did share my pronouns. I was like, I'm Ben, he, him, his. And then I just did whatever the rest of the intro prompt was. And nobody batted an eye, but it's this like bunch of like gruff, or mostly cis white guys in the room. And then as we're going around, the only other person that shared their pronouns shared they, them pronouns and came up to me after and was like, thank you so much for sharing your pronouns, because I would not have felt safe in that room doing that. And it was really important to me that you did that. And I was like, oh my God, like I had no idea. I would not have known that if I hadn't shared in that way. And then I shared with that person, like, yeah, also just so you know, I'm a trans guy. So if you ever need anything, like, I got you. Like, we're in this together, And the rest of the training, it was all fine. Everything was great and fine. And, but sometimes you just never know. You never know how people are going to respond to stuff. So anyway, I share that anecdote as you never know who's in the room. And it can be really powerful as you feel comfortable doing so, sharing.
I think another component that I appreciate about you, and that I think was something that I struggled with early, was there's like right ways to do it. And if you don't do it, it actually is like indicative that you're not aligned with like a progressive identity or something. So for example, like I would get, if we did a circle of like introductions and it's like, all right, everyone say your pronouns and like your land, your land acknowledgement and like your name. But then like someone forgot like their pronouns or something, I'd be like, oh, this person's like, they don't understand. Like they're clearly not up to par on like remembering this, how important this is. So it's like, not only was it sort of a brittle, you're either doing it or you're like completely off the wagon and you're like sort of potentially causing harm but there was no sort of like compassion and sort of like, we're all trying. And I feel like that is another element to like what you're talking about. It's not just like the sort of framing in a space of like, hey, if you feel comfortable, it's fine. If not, but it's like, you're also creating a bridge to people to say like, it's okay if you use it and you mess up, or you don't use it because you feel uncomfortable. But it's like, I feel like that energy, at least for me, and I feel like a lot of other folks who are in this political reaction timeline, I think there's part of the energy that we feel from folks on the right or others is because we maybe came with the like, you have to use pronouns, you have to use land acknowledgement, and if you don't, you're like a bad person. You know?
Yeah, well, I feel like that speaks a lot more to like cancel culture, and I think this might be this might be an unpopular opinion, but again, only representing myself here.
Do it.
I feel like cancel culture has hurt the progressive movement more than it's helped it.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a controversial statement, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. I don't know. So I don't know. I think that the anger underneath maybe the root of some of that cancel culture is very valid and very real. And I think it's important that we activate around that anger. And I think there's also, another kind of important piece of this conversation is acknowledging that a lot of this work can be emotional labor, right? And so thinking about, for me, like, I've worked on queer campaigns, I've worked for queer nonprofits, I've talked about this stuff a ton. I've got a great support network, lots of people who love me. I feel very fortunate and blessed in that way. I feel like I have the emotional capacity to talk about these things, right? So I feel great doing it in this space. But that's not a free pass for folks to just ask all their queer friends, like, hey, how do you move through like blah, 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 right? Because for them, they might be like, I don't even know for me, let alone the rest of the world, right? And so I think I'm going off on a tangent there, but yeah, sorry, bring me back.
No, it was around cancel culture and just like this sort of, one of the challenges is not just saying it or not, but then canceling other people who are not doing it perfectly.
Yeah. And I think, okay, yes. So full circle moment, back to cancel culture. I think part of why, and it sounds like maybe this isn't an unpopular opinion, but I think the harm that cancel culture has done is it hasn't created the space for people to learn and grow. And so people are paralyzed in fear of doing the wrong thing. And sometimes that can come from a really good place, right? Like sometimes it's not just about looking bad, but it's about like, oh, I really don't want to I don't want to hurt this person that I care about, right? Which is super valid and real. And the way that I would encourage folks, like, so I get the question often a lot of, hey, Ben, I had a friend who just came out who's trans or who's like struggling with their identity stuff. And like, I really want to support them, but I don't know how, and I don't know what's okay to ask. I don't know what's not okay to ask. And the guidance I tend to give folks around that is just thinking about who the question serves, right? If it's just a personal curiosity, like, are you interested in surgery? Like, is that question going to help your friend? Probably not, right? But if you're asking your friend, like, hey, I care about you. I want to know, like, if we're out to dinner and the server mispronouns you, do you want me to correct them? Like, that's probably really helpful information for you to know to support your friend, right? Because I know for me, like, or at least when I wasn't, I don't have that challenge anymore, but when I wasn't passing, I was like, please I do not want people handling my food. Like to know that I'm we're not going to talk about it. Like, just leave it alone, And then there are other instances where it's like, yeah, actually, I'm going to see this person a lot. And like, I feel weird bringing it up. So like, if you could bring it up, that'd be great. And we're never going to have those conversations if people don't ask. Right. So sometimes that's important. But if we're operating from a place of fear and concern of being canceled or messing up or making a mistake, we're never going to have that opportunity to like learn and grow and build those deeper relationships. Because ultimately, as we move through both learning and, having those missteps and learning through those, you're deepening your relationship with folks, especially if we're coming from a place of care. I think it becomes really apparent.
One other thing, and then I'll let Emmy jump in. So I want to say Ben recommended to me someone named Alok. Do you know Alok's full name, Ben? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I think it's Alok V. Menenon, and I'm not entirely sure if I'm pronouncing.
But if folks listen, just ALOK, it's gold. They're amazing. And so Alok, there was a talk that you sent me, Ben, where Alok talks about the conflation between comprehension and compassion. So this idea of like, why do you, as a non-trans person or a cisgender person, why do I need to like feel like I fully comprehend another, like a trans person's experience before I will have like compassion? And so you can have compassion and wish folks safety without like the using the sort of like, I just don't understand it as like a shield to be like, well, I'm actually okay if there's like violence perpetrated on these folks. And so I don't know if you want to speak to any of that comprehension versus compassion, or like what anything comes up for you with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, so I'll just offer a little bit of a content warning around mental health and violence. So if that is challenging for folks, maybe fast forward like 30 seconds or so, or a minute. But the trans community specifically trans folks of color, face an incredible amount of violence. This year alone, just in the United States, there have been 28 reports of death by violence against trans folks, and that's just what we know. That doesn't include all the unreported folks, all the folks that are erased in their death by families or the public in general. So it is real. And also when you look at homelessness rates of LGBTQ youth, especially trans youth, again, as we layer on intersectionality, right? We look at trans youth of color, homelessness rates go up exponentially, suicide rates go up exponentially. When we look at from a public policy lens, just recently, I mean, there's no shortage of things happening in the news, and not to be a downer. And it's important to note that the National Suicide Crisis Line 988 has officially removed support for the LGBTQ specific community. That being said, I do want to give some folks some resources. So if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health or know queer youth that might be struggling with that, the Trevor Project is a great resource, and you can call them at 1-866-488-7386. Also, the Trans Lifeline is also a great resource and offers a trans-specific crisis line, which is 877-565-8860. Yeah, the violence against this community is real. There's a reason why. Something that you shared at the top, Ryan, right? Was you shared that this was something you felt like you had some learning to do. And I would say that you're not alone in that. And that's partly by design, societally. LGBTQ folks have been erased historically, both by society, but also by ourselves, right? Like when a partner passes, often documents are gotten rid of, that history is erased for safety, right? And for legacy reasons. So this is not what we're seeing right now. The erasure of queer folks is not new. And it is dangerous. And so when we talk about comprehension versus compassion, there are a lot of folks that say, you know what, I don't get it. And they throw their hands up and they're like, you know what, that's not my problem. Right? I don't know anybody who's trans. I'm willing to bet you do and you don't know it. Side note. But so people just don't get involved. And so I think if we can come from a place of it's okay to not understand, it's not a pass to not care, because this community needs people to care, because we've been erased and because we do face exponentially higher rates of violence and because we're being scapegoated politically right now. Right. And that's something that I just personally, it feels like I feel like I've said this. I mean, people may have heard me say this before. Like, it just feels like a deafening silence right now with like the trans community under attack and like all like, and it's, but what are people doing? So I think we're all on learning journeys, and I want to honor those journeys. And it's really important for us to meet people where they're at. And I would challenge folks, if you're feeling overwhelmed, like, I just don't get it. That's totally okay. You don't have to get it. You can still show up with care and compassion and own that you don't get it, and that's still really meaningful and important. And can actually be what saves a life, right? Like if you have somebody in your life, especially a youth or a kiddo who comes to you and you're like, oh my goodness, I do not know what to do with this. That's okay. You can say, you know what? I love you no matter what. I love you unconditionally. We're going to figure this out together. You don't have to have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. but we do have to care.
Yeah, I think in this comprehension versus compassion conversation, it's harder for me personally to see, but like how others struggle with, like, we're all humans. Like, I care about my fellow humans on this planet that I share this planet with. And like, I want to do everything possible to make sure that they feel safe and cared for and loved. So I really appreciate you saying that. In some of these previous episodes that we've recorded on this topic with Annie and Haley and Raj and Nathan, what resonated with you in these conversations, and maybe like what felt missing or lacking? And you spoke earlier to like the general inclusion strategy is missing sort of these elements of intersectionality and being more explicit about that and helping people to understand. But yeah, are there anything in these conversations that are really like sort of standing out to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm also going to own my memory is not the strongest. So I'm just going to own that piece. I will say something that stood out to me in the episode with Annie and Haley is something that they circle back to a lot is the role and the importance of policy, both from a public policy perspective, but also like a policy within business perspective. And I was like, right on. Yeah. Cause I think, sometimes it can be, policy can be boring. It can be hard to get people excited about policy, right? Like, we think about policy, we think about maybe the HR person comes in and tells you all the rules that you have to play by. And you're like, oh my goodness, right? And those policies are what give folks a leg to stand on if something comes up that maybe isn't just or isn't right. It also holds us all accountable, right? I mean, yeah, it's, I think policy is important.
Yeah. Like, as B consultants, we talk about policies a lot, and the B Corp framework really like encourages the formalization of policies. And yes, I think a lot of people find that boring. I get really excited about policies because, yeah, they help to manage expectations. They help to make sure that everyone is on the same page. There's accountability. There are accountability mechanisms built in here. Yeah, it's like that leg to stand on that you're referring to. And I think there's, several reasons that policies have been the sort of like a backbone for the B Corp certification. And that's one of the things that we're really sticking with as we transition to the new standards is like these opportunities to see the way that we're doing things and the way that we want to do things on paper or, in your SharePoint or whatever. And that, yeah, we're like committing to this and we will continue to commit to this.
Yeah. And I love that you named the mechanisms to also operationalize it too, because that's such an important part of those policies for sure. Yeah. I would say the other thing that jumps out too, I know Nathan and have heard him speak a lot. And so this wasn't a net new learning. And something I appreciate about Nathan is when we talk about meeting folks kind of where they're at, I think he does that well in the business space, right? I think, you go to Build Southeast and, I think a lot of us like, I'm in Maine, I'm in the Northeast, right? Y'all are on the West Coast. I think some of us like in the coastal areas are like, wait, why can't we say these things? Like what, like we should push harder. We should. And the South has been saying for a long time, y'all, like, it is not that easy. And now we're experiencing it. Now we're like, oh, right. Okay. We get it. And it's almost a little too late. So I appreciate that conversation because I think in this moment in particular, where DEI is under attack on a federal level, and having conversations with other B Corps around like, yes, we believe in this work. Yes, we want to continue to do this work. And if we have to fire half our workforce because we lose our federal contracts, that's not helping anybody either, right? And so how do you continue to do the good work without risking losing these, federal contracts? And I think moving through it in that way of like, we can continue to do the work. We might have to alter our language a little bit and talk more about belonging and making sure people have what they need to be successful. and recognizing that we all bring different things to the table and that that's valuable, right? Like we can talk about these in a different, more accessible business way to meet people where they're at on that journey. And then I would say the one thing I think is we can then, as people come along on that journey, I don't think we just give them a pass. I think it's like, cool, great, awesome, we're here now. Let's keep going, right? Like let's keep the conversation going. And maybe we get to where we can use some of these other terms, right? But really making that space so that folks don't feel, because I think that's one of the things. It's like, as soon as somebody feels like we've belittled them, or they feel dumb, or they feel like they don't know something, or they feel left out, like nobody wants to feel like that. Like that's not a good feeling for anybody, right? But if people feel seen and they feel like they get to learn something new and they're being appreciated for learning and all of that, great. And it's not always that simple. All that to say, so I think within, when we talk about racial justice, I think we've also, even within that, forgotten some of that history, even because even part of how like whiteness was designed was rooted in gender, and how binary people would like elevate your quote whiteness. So there's these like, but that again, that history often gets erased and not talked about. And so it's interesting, even from a racial justice perspective, one could argue that we could go even deeper, right? And in going deeper, like it would create space for a more broad and intersectional lens work. And I think it's what I appreciate about B-Lab US and Canada's theory of change is that it does name racial justice, because that feels very important to name and like put a flag in the ground. And we don't have to put just one flag in the ground, right? Like we can also advocate on behalf of folks with disabilities. We can also, right, and we can name those as important pillars of building a just and equitable society.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, Ben, one thing you said to me a while ago, actually, I think you said it on a WMRJ call around, and I think this dovetails with this, is like, what's driving, from your view, this sort of anti-woke, anti-ESG, anti-justice rhetoric? Because I feel like you said, I'm an organizer, so I've knocked on people's doors, and like, they're not necessarily worried about me or hating me because I'm trans. They're like, they can't put food on the table. They're struggling in their jobs. Like, that's what people are. And like, how do we meet them there? And so I'm curious if like, what do you see like as really behind some of this like anti-woke, anti-ESG stuff going on? And maybe, yeah, what are some of the core issues that you see are driving it that we could get at?
Yeah, I mean, I think, quote, wokeness has been used as a distraction by the current administration, right? Because what they're saying is essentially like, look, those liberal elites, all they care about are like these terms and language bits that you don't understand or know and make you feel dumb. Aren't those bad, right? Yeah, those are bad, right? So there's this like, and people are like, yeah, I'm not able to put food on the table, and all they're talking about is this stuff over there, right? Like, yeah, they must be right. There must be something to this, right? And so, and which is like kind of, when you think about, I don't even like the term like woke, because I mean, actually what the word woke means is just awake and like aware. And I don't know how being awake and aware is bad, but it's been weaponized, just like trans women in sports has been weaponized, right? Like, if I'm working on protections for trans folks, and I knock on somebody's door, the first thing that they're like up in arms about is men in the women's bathroom. And then when I'm like, well, but would you want me in the women's bathroom? And they're like, no, that's what I'm talking about. I'm like, well, but like, that's what would have to happen. Like, and then you like have this big conversation and people are like, what? Like you just see their eyes just like, whoa. when somebody actually takes the time to meet them where they're at and have a meaningful conversation with them and meet them in a values place of like, what does this mean to you and how, right? Like it becomes a very, very different conversation than the yelling matches that happen on social media or all of these different places. Because at the end of the day, like a lot of folks are struggling to put food on the table, struggling to just like survive, and so if somebody gives them a scapegoat to be angry at, they're going to go for it. Right. And so it's, how can we, and this is where it's hard, right? This is where it's really, and I'm not always good at it. I had a situation come up recently where I've always felt like I'm good at having those bridging conversations and meeting people where they're at. And then sometimes it sends me in a tailspin and I'm like, I don't understand how, and I just don't understand. I don't understand how people can get to a certain place or whatnot. And it's hard. And so I think for folks that are in that bridging work, it's also like, we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace too. And that this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Or actually I really like this framework that somebody shared, is that it's a relay race. Right. And so like, know when you're ready to take the baton and when you have to pass it, that's really important.
I was in the Raj interview.
Yes. I loved that. I was like,
that was from Annie Leonard at Greenpeace.
Yes. I love that. Because it's so true. And so I think the best way to air quote combat this like anti-wokeness is to do the hard work of trying to meet people where they're at and trying to have those conversations. And that's going to look very different for every single person and every single conversation, right? There's going to be different things that people care about. There's going to be different issues that people are hung up on. And there's going to be different challenges in that conversation and in those relationships and how you know somebody or don't know somebody and all of that. So I'm not trying to pretend like, oh, it's easy, here's the solution, right? Because it's not, and it takes a lot of work. But like you look at using the marriage movement as an example, some people are like, oh, marriage was inevitable. And I'm here to tell you it was not. 30 years of people organizing around marriage equality, talking about rights and benefits and losing for 30 years. And then we start talking about love and commitment. And doesn't everybody have a right to have access to love and commitment? Tell me what love and commitment means to you. Oh, you're Christian. Tell me about what your faith means to you. Oh, I see you're married. Like, what was it like when you got married? Like, what, right? Like, and you're now all of a sudden we're having a very different conversation, right? Like, it is deep canvas. Yeah, it is. And actually deep canvassing, when we talk about deep canvassing, that technique was actually developed by queer organizers as part of the marriage movement coming out of California. It was coming out of Prop 8 out of California. And then it was refined by, oh my goodness, I can't remember their names, but there were a couple of sociologists that like really like dialed it in. And then it was field tested in 2012 in 4 states, Maine, Minnesota, Maryland, and Washington. All 4 states won. And then we start ticking states off across the country. But it's thousands of people having these deep conversations with folks that are, maybe in the middle, maybe leaning opposed, and following a formula that's truly being based in a values place and how we move people. And also, it wasn't even always just about the words, but also who was having the words. Like, I remember we used to have whole phone banks where it would just be like, because we would identify like, okay, what is the thing that's like hanging people up, right? And so we would have whole lists of voters that we identified their concern was about faith, right? So we'd have whole phone banks and canvases where it was just communities of faith calling communities of faith and saying like, hey, this is what my faith means to me. What does it mean to you? Or like, let's talk about that. Let's like unpack that. And so it was thousands of people moving thousands of people. And what was interesting about all of that is you would have a conversation with somebody who maybe was, so in organizer speak, like a 1 would be somebody who's strongly supportive, a 5 is somebody who's strongly opposed, and then you've got the scale in between, right? So you might talk to somebody who's a 4, so leaning opposed, and you start the conversation, you identify they're a 4, you have probably like a 20-30 minute conversation with them. When you leave their porch, maybe you move them to a 3 or a 2. So now they're like, okay, they were somewhat opposed, now they're undecided, or they were somewhat opposed, maybe they're leaning supportive, but like, right? We would then go back and do blind surveys where we would call that voter and say like, just like very quick, like just that same scale, but how do you feel about cigarettes and guns and just like a whole bunch of random stuff. And we would bury marriage just like somewhere randomly in the middle of that. And they would be wherever that canvasser left them 6 months later. So if they were moved from a 4 to a 3 or a 4 to a 2, 6 months later, they're still sitting at that 2, which is pretty powerful stuff. But that's what it looked like. And then, of course, you've got the air cover of like paid media and all of that. That's also doing the same thing. But, you know, you have this really cute family sitting around a kitchen table. And there's this war veteran that's talking about his granddaughter and how much he loves his granddaughter. And like, you know, and she's gay. And like, but you don't know who in the picture's gay. But like, right. And so it's these like images and messages of like love and caring that is ultimately what helped us get to a somewhat warmer climate for queer folks. And now we're seeing the backlash of that, right? People are already talking about Oberfeld v. Hodges there potentially getting repealed, which was the Supreme Court case where we won marriage in 2015. So, yeah. So you can't take these things for granted.
Truly. And it's interesting. Your anecdotes are so interesting. Yeah, as an organizer, I personally have knocked thousands of doors, mostly in the context of get out the vote and not necessarily deep canvassing. I have done some deep canvassing and it's quite daunting without the right training, but hearing you speak about it, I'm just like, that actually deeply translates to conversations that you have out in the world, like that a person can have out in the world. Like I have found that this administration and the political climate has been so frustrating because I'm just like, I don't know how to talk to other people. I don't know how to talk to people outside of my bubble. And what I'm seeing is like, oh, perhaps there are some really wonderful opportunities to like be cultivating compassion within our community. Just the active listening and like asking questions and being curious. And it's like, we say these things often, but how often are we actually practicing these ways of applying curiosity to our conversations that we have just like out in the world? But so I really appreciate you sharing these.
Yeah. I mean, and that's so real to your point. Like the active listening is literally the most important part. Like of a 20 or 30-minute conversation, the canvasser's maybe talking for 5 minutes of it. It's a lot of like, well, tell me what that means to you. Yeah. How did that feel? And like, it's all about trying to connect and trying to find that mutual ground spot. And then the same thing, and it was the same thing, we use the same method in trying to secure protections for trans folks in different ordinances, same idea, arguably harder. But when you're able to take people on a journey, you can move people.
There's probably one more question, Ben, before we get to the wrap questions around just like, what would you hope for or like want to see differently, I guess, in the B Corp movement to be better supportive of trans LGBTQ plus communities? And so like if there's any things you will want to see or things like that could maybe help listeners sort of think about what could we do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things, and I also, it's not like folks aren't doing. I know earlier I was like, oh, I'm so frustrated, no one's doing anything. That is not true. There are a lot of great people doing really great things. So like that was a misstep of my own to say that. And I think what I would like to see. Oh my gosh, if I had like one wish, what would it be?
Or it could be a
like
couple.
Like
doesn't have
genie,
to be
or
one.
A couple. Yeah. Do I get 3 wishes? Is this like the genie in the lamp? You get 3 wishes. I would want, one, I would love to see more intentional. I guess the thing I really want, like across, and this isn't just for trans folks or LGBTQ folks, but really just like across the board. I think there is such a huge opportunity for the B Corp community to do meaningful collective action policy work. And to be clear, like Grace, the folks at BWS Canada are like, they are in that work. They are like, they are doing the thing. And I think I'd love to see more B Corps step into that work. Cause I think like Grace and the folks at B Lab are like, hey, we've got things cooking, but can't do it alone. Can't do it in a vacuum, right? Like we need people to step up and be part of that work. And so I think that would be, if everyone's listening, like, what's like one thing I could do? I would say, I don't know how Grace would feel about this, but I would say email Grace and ask, how can I plug in? Or maybe don't do that. Maybe go to the BWS. I'm sure, maybe check the Beehive. I'm sure there are things out there for places you can plug in, but there's always a lot of policy work happening. And I feel like there seems to be an appetite for action. And yet, I think we're capable of so much more than what we're currently doing.
Maybe I would just slightly amend that to say, I think your Be Local is a great middle step without inundating Grace's inbox. And if there isn't like a policy lead at your Be Local, like it would be really cool to either catalyze that, or even if you don't know 100% what is required, like start spearheading that on your own. Yeah, I fully agree. Like folks are not fully taking advantage of the infrastructure that's has started to be built to be more involved in advocacy work.
Yeah. And then I guess like I guess I would also love to see added to the theory of change, like just the inclusion of folks with disabilities, the LGBTQ plus community, right? Like taking, like, I think that we can do many things. I think we're capable of doing many things. And I think it's important to name each of those things.
I appreciate that. We could obviously talk about this forever, but we do have to wrap our time here today. We often ask guests on the podcast, what do you need right now? And how can listeners support your work?
That's something I could always be better about, is asking for help. I mean, I would, something I do. So wearing my Be Proud co-chair hat, we're always looking for folks to get involved. So I think, the moment in time that we find ourselves in, I can only speak for myself. I am stretched super thin, and I think I know that there's more that I would love to do for Be Proud, and I just haven't had the bandwidth. And so if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I've got bandwidth, I want to like do the things, please reach out to myself, reach out to Cal Moody. We co-chair Be Proud. Would love to invite you in and find a role that's meaningful for you so that we can be doing more of this meaningful work. Cause I think one of the things that we hear a lot about is, businesses are like, wait, we just want to know like what the right thing is to do, And so I think the more that we can, and also, a lot of the recent Be Proud meetings, what we've done is really created space for attendees who are primarily of the LGBTQ plus community to really just like connect and share, because so many folks are feeling isolated. And so I think the more that we can have the bandwidth to create those opportunities of connection, I think that just serves the whole community, honestly. And it takes people power to make these things happen. So
indeed. And where can folks go to learn more about you and your work?
Campfire.consulting is my work. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm very findable. Yeah. And then if you're oddly curious about my photography world, you can go to bennmarine.com.
Did you already mention your podcast?
Fun. Oh, yeah. And Responsibly Different. You can search Responsibly Different wherever you find podcasts. It's interesting. Our recent episodes have been more focused in our lane of like media. So if you see the podcast has really become more of like a channel. So the Fireside is all media stuff. But if you look at like Impact Chats, that's all the stuff I think this crowd would be interested in.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. We so appreciate your wisdom and the work that you have done on behalf of people on this planet.
Thank you all.
Sorry.
No, thank you. No, thank you all for the opportunity. No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, Beyond the Bee listeners. If you're looking for even more inspiring conversations with leaders on the front lines of our movement towards just futures, Be sure to subscribe to Next Economy Now, produced by the team at Lift Economy. Next Economy Now broadens the focus beyond the B Corp movement to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, equitable, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Check out our latest episodes at lifteconomy.com/podcast. You can subscribe to Next Economy Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.